So I'm on the San Francisco Peninsula, and one of the questions I get on a regular basis from sellers are how do we know what offer to take? Even though the market has changed in our area, we still generally get more than one offer. So how do we gauge which of those offers is going to be best for the seller? Well, here's some criteria that we use. First thing we're going to want to know is who's the agent, and even more than that is, are they an active agent? So if they're an active agent, meaning someone who does several deals a year, generally those kind of agents are better to work with than somebody who only does one or two deals a year. Now that's not a firm criteria, but we want to know who it is that we're working with. Is the agent from an area that where they're not familiar with the customs of how we sell real estate on the San Francisco Peninsula? And then also, what kind of reputation does that agent have? Does the agent have the reputation of closing deals on a regular basis to where we're not going to have trouble with their buyer? Or are they the kind of agent that gets nitpicky throughout the transaction and is always looking for an out or a way to renegotiate for their buyers? Purchase price. Obviously, that's the biggest thing that a seller is concerned about. The highest price is not necessarily the best price. The highest price is not always that's not always the best offer. Many times sellers want to take the highest price, and they don't want to consider any of the other strengths of the offer or weaknesses of the offer. In addition to the purchase price, we're going to look at, is there a possibility of a counteroffer? Now, sometimes an offer comes in and it's just such a good offer that you don't want to mess around with that. You want to accept the offer right away and not counteroffer them. So we want to know that. Are the people getting a loan, or are they paying all cash? If they're getting a loan, then we want to see a pre-approval letter. And then again, if they're getting a loan, we look at how much of a down payment that they're putting. And we want to verify that the funds are actually there. We want some kind of bank statement or brokerage statement to show that the people actually have the down payment money that they're suggesting they have. Sometimes the buyer has to get a loan or gift money from relatives. So we want to know that too. Same thing with cash. We want, if someone says, hey, we're going to pay all cash for this property, which is about 10 to 12% of our market right now, we want to see, you say you've got all cash, we want to see proof of that cash. We want to see a bank statement. We want to see a brokerage statement. Sometimes high net worth people just simply provide a letter from their private banker. We're going to call that private banker just to make sure the money is there. Back to getting a loan. Yes, we're going to look for a pre-approval letter. We're going to read that, but then we want to call the lender to verify that pre-approval letter. Some lenders are a little more loose with generating a pre-approval letter than others. We want to see, does that lender have documentation on the buyer, on the borrower? Do they have all their pay stubs? Do they have their bank statements? Have they run their credit scores? Is it a true pre-approval? Meaning, do they have all the documentation on them, or is it just a partial package to verify what the buyer has? Earnest money deposit. Generally, in our area, buyers put down a 3% earnest money deposit into escrow as soon as they go into contract. We want to make sure that the proper amount is in there. Typically, that earnest money deposit is 3%, goes into escrow. So in the case of $1 million purchase, it is about $30,000. Contingency. This is something that's very important. There are typically three types let's just say maybe four types of contingencies that people use in the purchase of a piece of real estate. They have a loan contingency. So we want to know that the people have been pre-approved, that they can get the loan. So sometimes that is a contingency that the buyers try to put in. Sometimes there's an appraisal contingency, meaning will the property appraise for whatever the buyer has offered? Generally, we don't like to see an appraisal contingency. Then we have inspection contingencies, and inspection contingencies could be anything. It could be inspection of the disclosures provided to the buyer. we want to make sure that the buyer has read all of the disclosures and has signed off on that documentation to say that yes, they're familiar with the condition of the property that they're buying. And then inspection contingencies. Generally, with inspections, we have a general property inspection, we have a pest, or in some areas they call it a termite inspection, and sometimes a foundation inspection, sometimes a chimney inspection, sometimes a roof inspection. Generally, the seller is going to provide all those inspections up front, and we want to make sure that the buyer has gone through those and that they have typically not put a contingency in for those things. How long is a closed escrow? Typical closed escrow in our area is 30 days. Sometimes we see 21 for a loan. Sometimes if it's cash, we see 7. And then this goes back to contingencies. If the buyer has the contingency for selling another property first, sometimes that closed escrow is going to be 45 days. So we're going to look at that and gauge the offer based upon how long it's going to take to close that escrow. The longer the escrow period, the more chance of something going wrong during that time. And then back to the disclosures. So the seller has provided everything up front in our area, all the inspection reports, the preliminary title report, the seller's disclosures where they talk about all the things that have been wrong with the property over the years and all the things they fixed. We want to see, excuse me, that not only the buyer has signed those, not only that they have read them, but they've signed every piece of paper that we've given to them. That way they can never come back and say, hey, I didn't see this and I'm going to use this as a contingency in my offer. Seller and buyer paid items of a standard for the county. So for instance, in our county, there's a transfer tax in many of the cities. We want to see that the buyer is paying their fair share, or their, in this case, half of the city transfer fees. We want to see that the buyer is paying the title and escrow fee, which is again standard in our county, and then give backs in the offer. Sometimes we see an offer that comes in and they say, well, the purchase price is say $1 million, but we want $10,000 back towards the buyer closing costs. We want to consider that in the offer, and then additional considerations or anything weird that's put into the offer that that might jeopardize the ability of closing the deal at all or closing it on time. So that's how we judge our offers. And if you have more questions on that, give me a call.